Hi everybody, welcome back. Today I'm going to be covering paper 4. Let me get my screen brush. So many people are asking me to do this. I really don't like doing paper 3 and paper 4, and I'm also quite busy, but I'll give it a go. Again, I'm not a Cambridge examiner, so please don't take my word as law. It's always good to listen to what your lecturers say. It's also good to do practice papers. That's one of the best ways to learn. But I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to try and give you some tips if I can on how to approach paper 4. I'm not going to cover every single question. I'm just going to cover those from the most likely the abnormal psychology side. So it's 1.5 hour paper. Total marks is 60. As I usually say, 1 mark usually means you should spend at least 1 minute. But again, it varies. It depends on the question. If it's a short question, just answer it quickly and move on. So you got more time for the essays because you got a lot of essays to write, right? This is the paper that requires a lot of writing. So please make sure you time yourself properly and pace yourself because you don't want to run out of time. Now, section A, you answer 2 questions. B is just 1 and C is just 1. So you get an option. Let's look at section A. All right, section A. You must answer 2 questions from this section. Answer all the parts. Okay. So let's take the abnormality question first, right? Psychology and abnormality. We'll zoom in a little bit. Zoom. Oh, why can't I zoom? Zoom. There we go. So let's see what we have here. It usually gives you a case study or it gives you a little picture or something to base your answers on. And it's also very structured. So this actually is quite easy because it's structured. It's not so difficult. Okay. So Griffiths refers to a case where a person addicted to gambling who says, if I wasn't actually gambling, I was spending the rest of my time working out clever little schemes to obtain money to feed my habit. These 2 activities literally took up all my time. This quote is typical of gambling and many other types of addictive behaviors, including pyromania and kleptomania. So this is just an excerpt from somewhere that is about addiction, right? By Griffiths. Griffiths studied addiction. He gave some characteristics of addiction and so on. Now, although it's about gambling, the first question comes out as explain what is pyromania, right? Okay, fine. So it's really straightforward. Explain what is meant by pyromania. So if you know what it is, ta-da, you've got it, right? Again, pyromania comes under addiction, so they're obsessed with something. What are they obsessed with? The word pyro here means fire, basically, right? So it's people who are obsessed with fire. Now, how many marks do we get for this question? Okay, it's a 2-mark question. What does that mean? That means I can't just answer one thing. I have to answer at least 2 things, right, to get 2 marks. So what are those 2 things? Let's say I blank one here. Okay, so let's say pyromania, right? Pyromania, right? So what would I say about pyromania? Firstly, it is an intense fascination with fire or setting things on fire. You could even say things like people like this often experience tension before they set something on fire, right? And then what happens after they do an addictive behavior, right? They feel a sense of relief after playing with fire or watching something on fire. They feel a sense of relief, right? So that's basically like any addiction, right? You're obsessed or you're fascinated with something, right? You feel a certain level of tension, and in order to relieve your tension, you go and do that thing, right, which you're not supposed to do, and it gives you a sense of relief. So anything along these lines that explains pyromania, just remember that you're not explaining it from a general sense. Pyromania is specifically about fire. So don't just say something like, oh, it's when a person is obsessed and then they feel tension and then they feel relief. No. That's not good enough, right? This is specifically pyromania. So if you want to get 2 marks, at least 2 points. You want to add an extra point for good measure, that's fine. But I should see at least 2 distinct points, right? You cannot say a person has an intense fascination with fire and they are obsessed with setting things on fire. Although those are, can be split into 2 sentences, it's not a separate point. It's the same thing, right? It must be something that's different from the previous point in order to get those 2 marks, okay? So we're done with that. Explain questions are pretty easy. It's literally just asking you for a definition and giving a little bit more detail, and that's where you get the 2 marks. Next question, give 2 components of any addiction outlined by Griffiths. Okay, so Griffiths gave 5 or 6 different criteria of what constitutes an addiction. You need to give 2 of them, but again, it's a 4-mark answer. So it's not just writing 2 things, it's explaining it as well. Yes, it says give 2, but you can't just write 1, 2. You need to give an explanation because it's a 4-mark question, right? So Griffiths criteria. Right, so if you forget, I can't remember all the criteria. Okay, I mean, I remember a few of them. So for example, let's say, okay, an easy one is a smoking addiction. Let's say you know someone with a smoking addiction, or you can imagine people who are smoke addicts, right? Smoking addicts. When you think about them, what are some of the criteria that come to mind, right? The first one is that you might probably remember that, when a cigarette smoker smokes, in order to get a high, 1 cigarette's not enough, right? Sometimes they have to take 2. And after taking 2, they have to take 3. And after taking 3, they have to take 4, right? My grandmother was a heavy smoker. She had to smoke like a whole pack of cigarettes a day just to be happy, right? So what do you call that, right? When you build up a tolerance, right? So tolerance is one of the things I remember because, my grandmother was a smoker. An easy way to remember facts and figures is to relate them to your own life, right? So always ask yourself, what aspects of my own personal life can I relate to something like, addiction, right? So my grandma was addicted to cigarettes, and so she had a tolerance, right? She couldn't just smoke 1 cigarette, she had to smoke several. So, right, tolerance, and you can explain that. Okay, so maybe let's write in a sentence. One of the, how did they phrase it here? Components. Okay, so one of the components of addiction outlined by Griffiths was tolerance, right? And then explain it. Tolerance is when an addict gets used to the amount of addictive substance they consume and therefore needs more of it in order to feel high or to feel the drug's effects or so on and so forth, right? So that's one thing you can say, tolerance, right? So this gives you 2 marks. You've identified what it is and you've given a nice explanation as to what tolerance means, right? At the same time, I always think about my grandmother when she comes over to my house. My mother doesn't like her smoking, so she always throws out the cigarettes and she can't find the cigarettes and she gets very anxious, right? So what do you call that? You call that a withdrawal symptoms, right? So another component of addiction. Okay, I mean, you want to write outlined by Griffiths. I'm just going to copy it. Right, was withdrawal. Right. So withdrawal is when an addict doesn't get their substance and their body begins to crave for it and they can feel very anxious and unable to function properly unless they receive the addictive substance. Right? So just generally just explain what is withdrawal. As long as it makes sense, you should be fine. So again, 2 marks here, identified tolerance, explained it. Another 2 marks here, identify withdrawal and also explain it. Ta-da, you've got 4 marks, right? So again, whenever you see questions like this for 4 marks, don't get confused. Even though it says just give 2 components, it's not just writing it, it's also to explain what those components are. And so it could be anything to do with addiction, right? So salience, withdrawal, tolerance. I can't really remember what the others are. Does anybody else remember? Yeah, conflict, right? Fighting with your family, and mood modification when it's like it makes you happy, right? That substance makes you happy, and then relapse. Relapse is when you revert back to using it after going through, like, let's say you go for some Alcohol Anonymous therapy and then you manage to give it up for a year, and then relapse is when you start drinking again, you get addicted again, right? So any of those components, you just explain it, you'll be fine. Same with any other question, right? Always look at the marks and then always answer from there. Suggest 2 ways to measure a person's addiction to gambling other than using a questionnaire. All right, so it's pretty clear. other than using a questionnaire. So you can't use a questionnaire. What's a questionnaire? It's a written interview, right? It's like a written interview. You write down questions on paper, you give it to someone to answer. That's a questionnaire. Now it says, suggest 2 ways to measure a person's addiction to gambling, but you cannot use a questionnaire. So this was one where you have to think a little bit, right? You have to think. Measurements. How do we measure people's behavior, right? So sometimes you get confused, like, oh my god, I don't know how to do this, don't worry. So measures of addiction, right? So if you can't use a questionnaire, which unfortunately in most of psychology, we use a lot of questionnaires, right? So ask yourself this question, right? How do psychologists measure behavior? How do they measure it? They could measure it in a variety of ways, right? For example, in Bandura's study, they were watching, these kids do stuff, right? So that's, you could call it an observation of behavioral observation, right? That's one way that you can, collect data and measure data about someone. Behavioral observation. Okay, what else could it be? Let's say, for example, in Savitra and Silverman study, remember? They interviewed one boy, they tried to help him, right? So that's a type of a case study, right? You could say it has, interviews, right? Stuff like that. So that's 2 possible examples that you can use when it comes to answering this question, right? So again, the question is just 2 ways you can measure a person's addiction, right? Again, it's a 4-mark question. So yes, I'm going to mention 2 ways and then I'm going to explain them. So one possible way to measure someone's addiction is by using a behavioral observation, right? Behavioral observation method, maybe. And then we explain it. What is behavioral observation, right? For example, we could say a researcher could do covert sensitization pula, covert structured observations of people at smoking areas in restaurants. And take note of how many cigarettes each person smokes, right? Something like that, right? So a researcher could do covert structured observations of people smoking areas. What is the structured observation? How many cigarettes each person smokes, right? Covert means, they're in disguise or hidden, right? So that's explaining my observational method, right? So I'm going to somehow collect data using observation about people with addictions. How am I going to do it? I'm going to quietly watch or secretly watch people and count how many cigarettes they smoke, and that would give me, enough evidence some evidence to say that, okay, this person's probably addicted because they've smoked 5 different sticks of cigarettes, right, in 1 hour, something like that, right? Another possible method would be to use case to interviews in it doesn't have to be in case study, it can just be interviews, but since I wrote case study, in a case study, right? A researcher could invite an addict to be interviewed and ask them questions about their experience being an addict and how they got started, right? Something like that. So that's one of the ways you can measure, someone's addiction, how bad is it, how difficult it is to control, and so on and so forth, right? So again, identifying 2, behavioral method, interviews case study method, and then explaining it. That's where you get your 4 marks, okay? Please don't just identify, you have to explain why, because it's a 4-mark question. Lastly, discuss the strengths and the weaknesses of using questionnaires to measure kleptomania. You should include a conclusion in your answer. Okay, so this one, how many marks is it? You can see that it is a 5-mark question and it says include a conclusion. So where are these 5 marks coming from, right? Remember, strengths and weaknesses. So logically, I'm just going to put strengths and weaknesses. So I'll divide it by this. You identify a strength, right, for 2 marks. You identify a weakness, okay, 2 marks. And a conclusion for 1 mark, right? So that's where you get your 5 marks. 2 plus 2 is 4, 4 plus 1 is 5, right? So hope that makes it easy for you to structure your answer. Now let's say the strength. So what are we talking about? Strengths and weaknesses of using questionnaires to measure kleptomania. Specifically, kleptomania, always read the question. You're not trying to measure a general disorder, you're trying to measure a specific disorder using a specific method, questionnaires. Again, what is a questionnaire? It's a written interview, right? It's like a written interview, just written questions on paper. So what's the strength of a questionnaire, right? So turn your mind back to your research method days, right? Where we learned that, you know, if you write stuff down and all that, one of the strengths is that, what? You could say that you can, something I forgot. Okay, using close-ended questions in a questionnaire allows for the researcher to what? So if you use a close-ended question, you can create more quantitative data to collect quantitative data, right? So now you have to explain. You've identified the strength. Now you have to explain why is this a strength. So this is what students always miss out on. This is the big part. Why is it a strength, right? Yes, you have identified the strength, collecting quantitative data. Good. Why is that a strength? So what if it's quantitative data? How does that in any way help me, right? So one of the things about quantitative data is that quantitative data makes it easier for the researcher to calculate the data. Let me think of a nice way of phrasing it. The results, because it's just numbers. That sounds a little bit, it's not really the A2 level answer I'm looking for, but my brain is a bit tired. Using closed-ended questions, the questionnaire will allow for the researcher to collect quantitative data. Quantitative data makes it easier for researchers to calculate results because the data is in numerical form. So what mistake am I making? Right? It says measure kleptomania. In my answer here, did I mention kleptomania? No, I did not. Right? So we need to add it in. See? I spotted my own mistake. I make it, students make it, we all make it. So using closed-ended questions in a questionnaire allows the reason to collect quantitative data about people's kleptomanic tendencies, right? Quantitative data makes it easier to calculate results because the data calculate results and measure someone's level of kleptomania because the data is in numerical form, right? Something along those lines, as long as you can explain it, and you should be able to get 2 marks. Right, moving on to weaknesses, right? So do I need to put 2 strengths? No. 1 strength is enough, but just make sure you explain it. That's fine. You want to put 2 strengths, you can, right? But generally speaking, I usually just focus on 1 and then explain it. You should be fine. Okay, weaknesses. All right, so what are the weaknesses of a questionnaire? One of the main weaknesses is always social desirability, right? So using a questionnaire can result in socially desirable responses. Okay, so we have to explain. Oh, sorry. to measure kleptomania. Okay, so now again, why? Why is it kleptomania when being measured by a survey, or measured by a questionnaire, may not give accurate results? Why would it be socially desirable? Well, if you think about it, kleptomania is not something to be proud of, right? We're doing something illegal, it's stealing. So we can say that, right? So we can say that because kleptomania involves stealing, people may feel too ashamed to admit their tendencies on a questionnaire. Hence the data will be, excuse me, it's 12:36 a.m., just past midnight, but will be biased. Okay, so we've got our strength, and we've got our weakness. Now we need our conclusion. Now, usually a conclusion means you pick one side over the other, right? You can do that. Some people say you can justify both sides. I'm fine either way. Let me see if I have one here on my essay writing guidelines. I don't think I included it here. Okay, but anyway, a conclusion is usually up to you, right? What do you think after you've written your strengths and weaknesses? What do you think? Now, the most important thing to remember about conclusion is sort of like an analysis of what has been said, right? And you make a decision. It is not a repetition of what you wrote, right? So I think the number one mistake that students make is that they just repeat what was written here. They say, in conclusion, a strength of questionnaire is that it's quantitative, and a weakness is that the questionnaire is can result in social data. That's just your copying and pasting what you wrote, right? So it's not a repetition. Do not do that. Conclusion should be some form of analysis, right? So something like, in spite of its weaknesses, questionnaires are very useful to researchers when it comes to studying kleptomania, because it can be easily and quickly administered. Something along those lines. Okay, so again, conclusion should have a little bit a little bit of information that's new in a sense, right? You're not just repeating yourself, you're making an analysis, you're making a stand, right? So I prefer it this way. You make a stand. You can also go against it. You can say that, oh yeah, I think they're useless, right? Because there's so many mistakes and problems with it, right? It's up to you, as long as you justify it, right? You have to give a reason. So always remember, give, I won't write that down. Always give a reason. Why is this good? Why is this bad? Why is this a strength? Why is it a weakness, right? And if you can do that, and you can convince the reader that you know what you're talking about, you'll get full marks. Okay, so again, just recap. These are the structured questions. They're really easy to answer because they're structured. The marks are fairly easy to understand as well, right? So always make sure you read the description. It could be a hint, clue, and stuff like that, or a picture if there's one, right? And so on and so forth. Okay, so let's move to the section B. Ta-da! You must answer one question, right? So just one question. You've got a choice of 4 different questions. I'm just going to cover abnormal for today. What does it say? Design a longitudinal study to investigate whether cognitive behavioral therapy manages schizophrenia effectively. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to be able to, okay, so 10 marks is a lot of marks, right? But it's a design question. It's pretty easy. All of them are design, right? Design. So if you just practice doing designs, you should be able to tackle this without any problems, right? And then later we'll go to the explain. But for now, we're going to design, right? So when it comes to designing a study on what disorder was it? Schizophrenia. Okay, so first things first, you want to, actually I can just use my template. Design, ta-da, there we go. Okay, so when it comes to a design question, these are the things you want to look out for. What, who, how, where, data, and ethics. Okay, so let me explain. Let's just copy this. Yeah. Now before we can go further, we need to figure out what the question is asking us for. Describe a longitudinal study. Aha, not just any study. A longitudinal means it's over a long period of time, at least a year, to investigate whether CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, manages schizophrenia effectively. So a lot of people believe that yes, CBT is the best, but what about in long term, right? Does it really help? I don't know. So, well, that's what we're here to find out, right? So, let's see. What we need to do is go back to so what we call it is the named method, which is what was it? I just forgot. Longitudinal study. Right, so we have to make sure that whatever we do in the design of our study, it must feature some form of element that suggests longitudinal, right? So let's do the what. The what is the research method, IV, DV, operating definition. Okay, so what we can do is, for example, since it's longitudinal over time, right? So it could be, let's say, an experiment. Now I'm just writing it. I'm still writing it in point form. Please write it in essay form when you get it, right? So it could be an experiment, maybe two groups, right? Longitudinal study, right? So let's do CBT group versus control group, right? Over, let's say, 1 year, over 1 year. Okay. Yeah, so an experiment where we compare some people in a CBT group and some people in a control group over 1 year, and we see whether or not there's a big difference in their level of schizophrenia, right? So who are we sampling? Schizo patients from a local psychiatric ward. Okay. Procedure, how are you going to conduct it? So usually I do this, step 1, step 2, step 3. What am I going to do, right? So this doesn't require. Sorry, before I forget that, you can also put like a number of people. So let's say 50 participants. Put something that seems reasonable. All right. So then, how is the procedure basically of the study? How you can do it from top, bottom, middle. For the sake of an example, you could say like, participants will be randomly allocated to either the CBT or the control group, and what else will be paid? Okay, that's up to you, you don't have to. But yeah, so anyway, I won't write the whole sequence of events, but basically participants will be randomly allocated either CBT or control group, and then after 3 months they check in, after another 3 months they check in, and the last 3 months they check in one more time, something like that, right? So something like that. Just basically it's just a procedure. How would you conduct this study, right? In my head, it's 2 groups of people. Let's say 10 people in CBT, 10 people in control, just for example's sake, and then I do an emceeing, and then I can compare over time, over 1 year, whether or not the CBT group did better than the control. Okay, where would the location be? Location could be in a research office, perhaps. Something generic, can be in university, can be wherever. Just say, yeah. I mean, if you put research office, make sure you have a actual place, right? So no, not actual place, but make sure it's a place that makes sense rather, right? So researchers office, something that makes sense for the situation, right? So it's schizophrenia, I'm having 2 groups. It could also be done maybe at the hospital itself, right? So they could do it at the hospital. Okay, what data is collected? So we have to explain here what data we plan to collect, right? So try to collect multiple sources of data so that it helps your answer grow a little bit. So for example, it can be quantitative data sources by doing, let's say, a survey about schizo symptoms even do qualitative data, right, by interviewing schizo. And okay, sorry, no, it's actually wrong. Sorry, I wasn't thinking right. The data here is the data from the study, which means that you want to compare CBT group versus control measures done by filling up a no. Oh, I'm so tired, I just can't. For those of you watching, I don't think you realize how exhausted I am when I record videos. It's absolutely draining. I don't even have the time to think. My brain has just shut down temporarily and I can't even type this sentence. Okay, take a deep breath. Okay, so let's say we measure schizophrenia. We are comparing two groups, right? So let's say we use a schizo scale. Let's say it produces quant data. So numbers, compare two groups using a bar chart, right? So this is the data and analysis. So not just data, you need to have the analysis as well. In this case, if you can remember the name of any of the scales that measure schizophrenia, go ahead and quote it. I can't remember any particular scale, but if you can, then that will be an easy way to boost your marks, right? Quantity data compared to groups using a bar chart. So that's your analysis. This is your data, this is your analysis. If you can remember the specific scale and give like what the score is and stuff like that, that would be really, really good. If you can't, it's all right. Just write what you can. Ethics. So for example, the control group will get CBT therapy after the experiment. So why do we do that? Why do we do that? Complementary. Why do we give CBT therapy after the experiment, right, to the control group? Because not fair to them, right? You give the CBT group got therapy and probably got help from it, and the control group gets nothing. So you want them to also benefit. So if the CBT therapy is good, then you give it to the control group after it's done. That's something important, right? Then typical things like informed consent, right? What else can you talk about in terms of ethics? Informed consent is the biggest one, right? That should be there. If you use debriefing, if you have deception, make sure you also have debriefing as well, right? So it's up to how you want to do it, as long as it makes sense. Essentially, what you want from this is, does your study make sense and successfully measure the named issue, right? So in this sense, it's longitudinal, right? So that's over 1 year, right? At the end of 1 year, right? Let's see. Yep, I think that's about it. Yep. So again, write this in essay form. What you're doing is you're just designing a study, and then you have to, make sure you follow certain instructions in the question, which is longitudinal, CBT, schizophrenia, right? So you can immediately spot the keywords, make sure that's in, right? To get 10 marks is literally just this, but you have to just make sure you elaborate and give detail, right? You don't have to justify why, you just have to give details about it. The justifying why comes under the explain, yeah. So you don't have to tell me why you chose, let's say an experimental choice, right? Or you don't have to say why you chose to do informed consent. You just have to put informed consent and explain what it is, right? So that people have the right to agree to, participate and stuff like that. Okay, so that's important. Oops, sorry. Okay. Next question, explain the psychological and methodological evidence. Okay, so this one's a bit tricky. What number is this? 5AB. Okay. Alright, so explain the psychological and methodological evidence. Psych and method evidence. Okay, so here's what you gotta do. It says explain psychological and methodological evidence. Psychological is easy because you just basically need to talk about whichever studies used or touched on schizophrenia. Okay, so for example, let me think. Someone did a study on schizophrenia. Who was it? Even I can't remember. Sorry, I just blanked out for a minute there. Okay, so if you can remember the studies that measured schizo and used. I think it was Sensky. Was it Sensky? I don't know. I have to check. Someone measured, schizophrenia and stuff like that in their study. And they used CBT if I remember correctly. See if I can find it in the in the answers. Okay, never mind. It's alright. Okay, it's alright. So when they say explain, you're basically trying to take some study that was done and link it back into your design, right? So explain why your design is the way it is. Why did you choose to, use CBT versus a control group? Maybe it was done before. Maybe something similar has happened. So you can use that to justify that. Okay, this is why I'm going to replicate the same procedure because it was successful for the other researcher, right? So what you're doing is just you're trying to link and justify why you do why you structured the experiment study in that way. Okay, so for example, I believe longitudinal studies, if you can remember any longitudinal studies, it's good to quote that. I think it's Sensky, but I can't remember 100% sure. I'm pretty sure there is a longitudinal study on CBT and a control group as well. So you can say that you're just basing it off of that. What they did, replicate it in a similar way, and that explains the psychology behind it, right? As long as you link it to a study, link it to a theory, link it to something, right? You have to link it to something, and you should be fine. The next one, just see the question again. Okay, so the next one could be your methodological justification. So why did you use the methodology that you did, right? So longitudinal, why longitudinal, right? So measures measures over time to see if there is a long-term effectiveness, right? Why is that important? If you look at the question says whether CBT manages schizophrenia effectively, right? So you want to see, is CBT effective at managing schizophrenia over a long period of time, right? If it is, then why longitudinal? Well, because you want to measure its effectiveness over a long period of time, right? So that explains why you chose to do it over 1 year. So this links well to this, right? What else can you say? Why randomly allocate to two groups, right? Random allocation is unbiased, right? And then also reduce individual differences. Right, because everybody can go everywhere, right? So as long as you have random allocation, it helps to reduce individual differences, it's unbiased and it's fair, right? So again, you're explaining, sorry, go up. You are explaining, you here, you say the two groups, I didn't put the word randomly, but generally speaking, you just can write that there randomly, and you're using that to justify why have you randomly separated them into two groups, right? Someone will get the CBT, someone will get the control, right? It's to reduce individual differences because you don't want a certain group of people only getting one, and you want it to be unbiased and fair. So again, you're explaining. Usually the methodology is the easiest part, so you can talk about ethics, right? Why must you example, why give the control group a chance for therapy, right? Because it is ethical to offer the group that didn't receive therapy for so long, right? Something along those lines. So if you can justify why do you do what you do, why does the control group get the CBT? Oh, because they may not have received therapy compared to the others, right? So why must you give the control group? It's because they don't receive it, right? So it'd be unethical, right? Why randomly allocate? Because it's unbiased and fair, right? Why longitudinal? To measure long-term effectiveness. So these are the justifications that you're giving to support your answer, right? So it's a 10-mark answer, 10 plus 8, right? So 10, focus a lot on this, right? You can get 5 points with elaboration or 10 unique points, should be fine. And then this one is only 8 points, I think. Yeah, 8 marks, right? So for 8 marks, have some level of content there, show an excellent understanding, right? If it's 8, then I would suggest maybe 3 points to explain the psychological side and 3 points with a good description to explain the methodological side. I don't think it needs to be 4-4 specifically. It's a bit difficult even for me to think about psychology evidence that backs up your study, right? Again, it doesn't have to be super direct. It can be in the same field, it can be similar, and as long as you do that, then you should be able to use that information to explain why did you do it this way, why are you doing it that way, whose study are you replicating, basing it on, getting inspired and stuff like that. So again, use the studies quoted in your journals, in your syllabus. If let's say, as I get this question a lot, if let's say you can't remember any of the A2 studies and you only remember the AS studies, like Bandura and stuff like that, you can actually include them. There's nothing wrong with that, right? They're also part of the A-level syllabus. So let's say you need a psychological study that is not from A2, you can pick it from AS as well, right? Let's say you're studying anger or something like that, then you can maybe quote something from Bandura, which is appropriate to do with measuring anger or studying anger. So that's the whole purpose of this question, is to see whether you can justify why do we do certain things the way that we do them, right? The way that you've designed them, rather. Okay. Next question. So this one is only one question, so that's done. The last question. Okay. Psychometric measures such as the Kleptomania Symptom Assessment Scale provide therapists with no useful information. To what extent do you agree with this statement? Use examples of research you have studied to support your answer. Okay, so this last question would be what I call the open-ended question. So, psychometric measures not useful, right? So, not useful therapies, right? Okay, so I'm going to give you the structure that I use, right? How many? It's 12 marks. It's a big question, big question. Let's look at the structure. Open-ended or debate questions, okay? So 12 marks, right? 12 marks. What can we say? First things first. You should give an introduction for one paragraph, okay? See it? 3 parts. Introduction. Right. After you do an introduction, what do we have? Give 2 agreement, 2 disagreement, right? So it should be agree, disagree, conclusion, right? How many marks is it? 12 marks, right? 12 marks. See, if you do it this way, each get 2 marks. Ta-da, you've got your 12 marks, right? So introduction, just sort of like explain the context, background perhaps of something. In this case, the question is about the KSAS, so you should give info about the KSAS scale, right? It's quantitative, it has from 0 to 4 for each item, right? Example, how often in a day, how much, how many hours, I think, how many hours in a day do you think about stealing, right? Something like that, right? So just an introduction, like I said, it's just to introduce the reader to your topic. Agree. So what are we agreeing with? A debate is always, you can go either way, right? So it says provide therapists with no useful information. Okay, no useful information. So you think, you're basically saying that, I think, it's useless. It is completely useless. Okay. If I think it's useless, why is it useless? Okay, so I think of what strong points would support the idea that the KSAS is not useful information, right? Not useful. So we actually covered it earlier, right? It starts with letter S. So we might say here under agree, right? So the problem of social desirability. Okay, and then we need to expand this, right? So we expand using, perhaps you can use the PEEL method, if you remember from my previous videos. Where is it? Right, the general essay writing format is PEEL, point, evidence, elaboration, link. Okay, so in this case, I don't have a link specifically, but the point is, the problem is that there's social desirability. People lie about their true nature of their stealing behavior. Therefore, data is biased and may affect the results. Alright, okay. So I agree that the KSAS is not useful because there's problem of social desirability. People might lie about their stealing behavior, therefore data is biased, right? So again, everything has to be linked somehow to the question and KSAS, because stealing, KSAS, stealing, right? So make sure the answers are linked to the question. So that's one agree. Why else do we think that it may not be useful? What's some of the drawbacks of a test like the KSAS, which is just 0 to 4, 0 to 4, 0 to 4, right? So the problem might be limited choices to answer, right? Hard for people to choose an answer because they might feel differently. Okay, and then perhaps you can say data is limited. So the problem here with the questionnaire is that you're limited between 0 to 4, right? So it's hard for people to choose an answer because they might think about things differently, and so you may not put it there for. Oops. Sorry, I was a bit quiet. I'm very tired. My brain is shutting down. But yeah, basically the agree part is you agree. Why do you agree? Okay, yes, because one of the problems is that social desirability can affect the results because it's not the true nature of stealing behaviors. Second, agree because there's limited choices of answers between 0 to 4, right? 4, right? So it's hard for people to pick. They might think things differently. Therefore, the only may not be able to understand questionnaire just by using a question. May not be able to understand kleptomania just by using a questionnaire, right? Disagree. So now we're going to support the statement by saying that I disagree. I think yes, the KSES does give some useful information. Okay. One, for example, you might say that let's see. Let's just recycle some answers. Quantitative data, right? So why is that a strength? Can administer to many people quickly and cheaply. Affordably, that's better. Affordably. Right? So remember, disagree is saying that I disagree with the statement that that there's no useful information, right? There is useful information. To measure and help identify kleptomania. Okay, so I disagree with the KSAS being useful. It is useful. Why? Because it's measuring quantitative data, which means I can easily, give it to many people, and becomes easier for the therapist to measure and help identify kleptomania accurately. Okay. Why else do I disagree with the statement? That means I think that it's useful. I think it's useful because more accurate data. Why? Because stealing is embarrassing, and I want to speak to someone face to face. As a result of that, what do? It's easier for them to fill out a paper in their own time. Right, something along those lines. And so let's look at it again. Introduction, explain, give some context with regards to the question. We're talking about KSES scale. What does it do? What does it measure? I agree with the statement that it does not give any useful information. So why? Because social desirability might come out, and the data will be biased. That's not good. I do agree that yes, it doesn't give any useful things. Why? Because has limited choices to answer of a range of 0 to 4, so it might be hard for people to choose, and they may not fully understand what they're saying, or we may not fully understand their kleptomania because our measures are too simple. But I disagree on the other hand. It's like having a debate. Yeah, this kind of question you have to have a debate with yourself, right? This football team is better than that football team. This handbag is better than that handbag. Why? Well, so I disagree with the statement. I said that no, it is useful. It's quantity data, can administer to many people. It's also more accurate data because people are embarrassed to talk in front with someone face to face, so it's easier for them to just fill it out, right? They don't feel as embarrassed, right? And that will allow. Yeah, so it makes life easier. Yeah, so it's easier they fill up the paper in their own time without having to talk to anybody. Last but not the least, the conclusion, right? So again, do not repeat info, right? So we don't want people to repeat info. Why? Because that's not a conclusion. Conclusion is like you want to give like a summary. A summary is when you repeat. Conclusion is like you want to analyze all the information, right? So if you've got the agree points, you've got the disagree points. Pick a side, right? So pick a side. Right, so if you pick one side, justify it. Did I put anything here about this? Okay. Give a conclusion, one paragraph. Focus on giving your opinions. Imagine you're debating with yourself, right? So again, it's your opinion, right? So you can even say, well, try not to frame it as in my opinion, but maybe you can say something like, I usually write this although there are some issues with using the KSAS, overall it is still an excellent measure for stealing and provides useful information to what else can we say? So what are the two things we identified for good? Quantitative by quantitative data. The research can be covered more quickly. What else can I say? I don't really say much in the conclusion. I just pick a side and explain why. And by using questionnaire, customers don't feel scared when approaching someone face to face. Right, so I picked a side. Okay, let's go through this. Again, my brain is a bit fuzzy, but yeah. Question is, psychometric measures are not useful. We've seen why. Yep, we agree they're not useful, and also no, they are useful. What we conclude is, although there are some issues with the KSAS, overall it's still an excellent measure for stealing and provides useful information to people. By using quantitative data, the research can be covered more quickly and by using questionnaire, customers don't feel scared when approaching someone face to face. By becoming more comfortable, patients are more willing to share their experience accurately. So all of this is good, and this explains why I have chosen that side. Right. So again, when you say pick a side, you have to explain to them why you chose that particular side. Is it because the strengths are more than the weaknesses are more than the strength, right? So either way it can flip. And I think that's about it. So when it comes to this kind of open-ended question, 12 marks seems like a lot, but if you follow this format, you should be fine, right? So there's actually a lot you can write. Introduction, maybe 1 mark. 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, so that's 9, 10, 11, I would say 2, and maybe 1 more for the introduction, right? So maybe it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Yeah, sorry, it's 2, 2, 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then 12, right? So it's 2 marks for every component. That's how you get your 12, right? Split it up into smaller components like what I do, and then you can easily get more marks. Okay, I won't go through the other questions because I'm falling asleep in front of my computer. Apologies for any problems with my words or any delays. I really am quite tired, but such is life. I hope you found this useful, even a little bit. Many of you are asking me for it, but I've been very busy. I can't really do as much as I used to. If you feel like donating, my donation details are always below in the description, or you can find it on my other videos. And I wish you all the best in your exams. Take care and God bless you.